I've asked my friend Mark to share his experience on the first part of step 4.
Thanks, Mike. Hi, my name is Mark. I'm an alcoholic. I've been through this process with the help of a big book step study sponsor and a lot of help from God with meetings, especially this one. That really helped me a lot. I'm currently still making amends, and I use 10, 11, and 12 on a daily basis to help me deal with my life. So, is that me?
I like the yell. We'll get it right eventually.
That's all right. Thanks. Sure. So, step 4, right? I mean, I heard a lot about this step when I first came in here. When I came in here, I was 16 years sober and in a really tough place in my life, to say the least. So I sat here for, a few years before I got to, I would say about 2 years before I actually got to this part. So I thought I was really excited to get here, and then when I got here, I wasn't so excited. But it took me a lot of buy-in, right? I had to go through step 1, and in step 1, I learned that I was powerless, right? I couldn't stop drinking when I had to, and I couldn't control it once I started. So the unmanageability and the allergy, I learned a lot about that, and I really identify with step 1 as probably more than any other step, to be honest, and especially around the unmanageability, around my emotions and my thoughts, and that part really kind of I knew was a problem in my life before I even drank. So I was curious to see what was causing all this. Because I'd never gone to therapy, I'd never really done any internal work on myself in that first 16 years of sobriety. So, it was affecting my life and my family's life for sure. And certainly everyone that was involved in my life was being affected by me because of my selfishness, and, I was always in fear and resentment. So then I get to step 2, and I learned something really important. They have a chapter that says there is a solution. Sometimes I wish they put that first, because I think my whole life I was searching for a solution. In that chapter, it was really important that I learned something that really hit home with me, that God, or my higher power, was my solution. And I had God in my life. I didn't have a relationship with him. I used him as, I would say, God clause. I would ask him to help me with this and get me this and buy me this and get me a beautiful wife and get me a new car and get me a job. And I was always using him to get me foxhole prayers. I was just using him for what he could give me. So I didn't really have a relationship. I just looked to him to get me out of problems once I got in them. Then I get to step 3, and I say this prayer, and it's to let him take over my life, which I was happy to do. The story behind that was funny, though. As soon as I said the prayer, I took my will back right away, which was what got me in here in the first place. I went to this, I did the third step with my sponsor, and we went to the Abbey in Spencer. Now, the Abbey to me was in my life before I even got sober. I would go up there and just cry my feelings away because of, of all the internal pain that I was in. It was really a special place for me. So when I met my sponsor that morning in Brookfield, I was curious to see where we were going. I didn't really have any idea we were going there, and then I get in his car and he drives there. So I thought, okay, this is it. I'm going to meet God today. There's no question in my mind. I've been to the Abbey. I know what it means to me. I thought this was all about the spiritual awakening part right here. And then I go in there and he grabs my hand, which I didn't know was coming, so that caught me off guard. At that point, I wasn't sure what kind of meeting we were meeting at, but because I'm a hugger, I like to hug. I'm not a hand holder. So if he hugged me, I would have been probably fine if he put his arm around me. But he grabbed my hand, and I was just really uncomfortable. And then we said the prayer, and I didn't feel anything. I said the prayer with him, but I thought there was going to be this overwhelming emotional, something happened to me. I really, if you ever watched Ebenezer Scrooge, where, he flies around, the town, and God, or the spirits show him the past and the future. I thought that's what was going to happen that day. And it didn't. So, he tells me some directions to go home, and we, going to start writing this resentment list. And, I get in my car, and I'm kind of pissed. And I'm kind of let down, to be honest, and because I was really kind of all in on this moment of, meeting God. I figured I could just kind of cut the corners here, and he was going to tell me what I needed to do, God. And I got in the car and I drove home, and that's why I took my will back right away. I went home and didn't do anything, and I didn't write for probably 6 weeks, nothing. And of course, Arthur calls me, I'm avoiding him tactically. He's like, what are you doing? So we had to meet and kind of have like a pregame, a meeting on this and just kind of go over this again and talk about the importance of what I was taking, my promise to God, where I was supposed to go with this, the next step. And, he got me back on track right away. But I used the excuse of, not having the spiritual awakening in step 3 in my mind is really what I was in fear. Because I'd heard in the meetings a lot about step 4 and people talking about how emotional they got. And I didn't know if I was really ready to go in there and look at me. Matter of fact, I know I wasn't. I know I needed to, but I definitely was not, because there was some ugly, buried stuff in there that I didn't really feel like I was ready to kind of look at. But I needed to. Because once I said that promise in step 3, and I knew the pain I was in and the pain I was causing in my home and everywhere else in my life, something had to happen. So I did go home that night after I met with him, and I started writing the resentment list, which I believe is probably the easiest part of this step, to be honest, right? Just writing a bunch of names down about people. It was my hit list, right? Who did this to me? I knew that someone on that list had caused me to be like this, or feel like this, or act like this, or think like this. My father was first, and I love my father to death. He was a great father. But, there was, in an Irish Catholic home, there's he's an alcoholic. There was a lot of things being thrown around and swears and up against the wall and just a lot of, traumatic things going on as a kid. And my mom, she was alcoholic, but I didn't know it at the time. In my family, it was all over the place. So I went on that list and I started writing these names down, and I was flying at this point. And it was, like I said, it became a hit list. Who was I going to go at? Who was I going to go after? And it started with my parents, in my family, the teachers. Where I grew up in Maine South. I went to Gates Lane, and I would go to school, and I was always looking for something there from them to change how I felt. But they didn't know this. And teachers back in the 70s, 80s, they were just assholes. And they were mean, and they weren't kind to me, and I wasn't kind to them, and I wanted them to be kind, so their names are flying off on this list. And I thought maybe it's one of them. And there was a teacher, a math teacher. He was a lefty. His name was Quaglieri. I won't get into him, but math, was my worst subject my whole life, and I had blamed him for being bad at math, even though he was a 7th grade math teacher, and I sucked in math before that. But he would get up there and he'd throw the eraser at you in the back corner, and he was like Ken Stabler, and he'd hit you right in the head. And I remember sitting way in the back one day, and he threw this eraser at me, and chalk powder. It looked like a scene out of Scarface with the cocaine everywhere, and it's all over me. I mean, I don't know how much chalk could be on an eraser, but it was a lot on there, and he hit me square in the forehead, and every kid in the class laughed, and I was just like, I didn't know what to do. I was after this guy my whole life, to be honest. I was looking him up on Facebook, but I couldn't spell his name. this guy was, when I thought about that moment, he was on my radar. And at that point, of course, all these other names are coming off there, onto this list. Like I said, teachers, friends, family, emotions, thoughts were coming up for me that things that I thought I had forgotten about, like those moments in school. And, I'm writing this list, and I write the whole list out, and, I think I have like 170 names or so, of people who I was jealous over, people who I was afraid of, people who bullied me. There was a kid in the neighborhood who had, I just remember the story, we were playing football out in the street, and his family kind of had money. I think they had a bigger house. I had a ranch house, but I always wanted a 2-story house because I thought if I lived in that house, I would feel better about myself. So he came walking down the street one day, and he had a bag of a black trash bag, and he had found like 15 pairs of corduroys in his closet or his attic. And back in the 70s and 80s, like corduroys were pants you wore. And I was so mad at him that he had found all these pants. They were his sister's pants. I guess that he fit into them now for some reason. How prideful that was or not. But I carried that kind of garbage around with me. Like, how at 45 years old am I thinking about this guy when he was 10? And those pants, they pissed me off so bad. And it was stuff like that always was just a common theme about coming up on this resentment list. It was the clothes people wore, those red and blue Nikes, which now I have like 10 pairs because I really solved that problem, right? They were like $20 back then. They're like $100 now, but I have 3 pairs of them. And I realized something though, the sneakers, they didn't change me. They look good, but they didn't change how I felt inside. And I was, those kind of things were very, like, that was the list of that kind of stuff, that kind of resentment, that kind of fear, that kind of shame, all was coming out in this list. And, in the 4th step here, it talks about, the inventory, about cleaning house. And at 15, 16 years sober, if you haven't done any work, clearly alcohol and drugs weren't a problem. They were a solution to that inside stuff. And I had no idea. Like I said, I had never gone to therapy. I had never gone to counseling. I'd never done any internal work on myself until I was desperate, in that much pain where I had to look at these. And still, after I wrote that list, I thought to myself, I couldn't stop focusing on the people on there and what they had done to me. And really, no one had done anything to me. That's what the disappointing part was. There were people on there that I may have gotten into fights with, or things like that were physical altercations. But when I look back on that list and I look back on my role, that's where the scary part. That's where it got scary, because I couldn't blame anyone. I wanted to blame drugs and alcohol, which I wasn't drinking at the time when I was sober at that many years, and that list had to have been the solution to fix me. And of course, it opened the door to a lot of things and a lot of thoughts in me. And resentment, right? Joe and Charlie say they have the best 4th step, like talking on, when they do like talk about the replay of the thoughts, right? And the replay of the thoughts are what gets us, right? And I was always replaying things. Even this week, I had, I work for the Sheriff's Department, but I have this organization that oversees our program that we run. They kind of fund us to be there. So I get this email from this person, and I'm like, you fuck. Like, I was so mad. And I had to pause really hard and like say, it was condescending, it was demeaning, it was unprofessional in my mind. 5, 6, 7, 8 years ago, I would have been, and like rattled off something really bad. And still, like, I looked at it 10 times. I went home and thought about it again, and then again, and I still didn't respond, which was good, because now we're talking 5, 6 hours later, and I was really proud of myself for kind of holding back. And then I responded. But I didn't respond the way I really could have. I responded as professional as I could be in that manner, and it wasn't anything, I didn't swear, of course, I didn't use anything insulting, but the more I thought about it, the worse the email got. She only wrote the email one time, but she might as well have wrote it and put it in the Boston Herald and the Globe on the news and showed everybody how bad I was. But what I really wanted from that email was, really, what I always wanted in life was validation. Like, I wanted her to write me this best email in the world, that I'm the most amazing person and we're going to have a parade for you. And then that didn't happen. She's just doing her job, really. So I had to do some inventory around that night, because I was going to meet with her the next day, and my mind was not in a good space. I almost didn't go to work, because my plan was not to go to work the rest of the week, because that was that damaging to me. And again, it was just an email. That was her shit, not mine. I had to handle it right. I had to go do the turnarounds on that night, and I did have a part in that, and she wasn't wrong. But initially, it was really damaging. And that's how I handled my whole life up until I started this process and I finished the 4th step. But it had to start with that list. I think, to me, it was the most profound thing that ever happened to me in my life. And I've had some good things happen to me, right? I can sit up here all day long and talk about the bad things, but I did a lot of good things. But the best thing that I've ever done for myself and the people around me was start with that list and look at the list and write that step 4, and then get to the point where I look at my role in it and realize my whole life was all about seeking validation and run on self-will. And that plan wasn't working. I acknowledged that in step 3. But yet still, when I got to step 4 to write the list and to try to figure out what was really kind of going on and realize the internal problem, it was my thoughts, I still was afraid. And fear, again, fear and self-will, those dominated my life. And I still battle them, right? Of course, I go into fear sometimes, and of course I take my self-will back. I just know enough now that I'm doing it. Where before, I didn't know that. Now I know when I pull it back, I start taking control of the ship. And I see my anger come out, and I see how I start thinking. I know enough to sit down, and I pray a lot. I remember telling Eduardo, I have like all these alarms that go off on my phone all day long. He's probably thinking I'm crazy, right? Just to say to pray. And I have them go off every 2 hours. It should go off every hour. Because I'm constantly trying to interject like God into my life, because I don't want to act and think like this anymore. I don't want to say the wrong things, and I don't want to keep making amends the rest of my life. I still have some amends to make. I'm not looking to add to that list. And if I don't do this work, and I don't stay in 10, 11, and 12 on a daily basis, that's what I'll do. I'll be making amends my whole life because I'm running on self-will. And I promised God in step 3 when we got there that I wasn't going to do that. So that's the step 4 part of it, like looking at the cause and effects of like what was going on and why I was trying to seek validation in other people. Well, that's like a Sigmund Freud question, right? We could go on and on all day long about why I was looking at it, but the fact was I was looking for it everywhere I went. And I just didn't see it until I did that work and that part. And then I realized that's not an effective way to live. My thinking was defective all the way up until 45. And it still is defective, no question about it. Yesterday I had a really big graduation at my office, and it was very emotional, and I was really tired, and I had to speak, and even thinking about today, I'm trying not to think about today, but I'm trying to stay in yesterday. And it was just all day long, I just sat at my desk like the first 4 hours of the day, just praying and trying to keep people away from me so I could stay, centered. And because my mind was just spinning with thoughts and fear. And I finally kind of settled down at about 11 in the morning. But it was a lot of work for me. And it's because of this work that allows me to have a solution to like that kind of moment. Otherwise, I'm going to say and do the wrong thing again, and look for validation again, and run on self-will again. And I don't want to do that. I can look at my past, and there's enough damage and enough, carnage to show that game plan was terrible, and I had to move away from it. And this work allows us a way to navigate through life. And helps us deal with my emotions. It helps us deal with resentment. I can't stay connected to God if I have all this garbage in me and all this anger and all the guilt and the shame and the remorse. It's impossible. I could go to church every day and pray. I could pray 24 hours a day. I could do everything I'm told to do. But if I let that garbage stick inside me, all that fear and all that resentment, all that anger, I'm not going to open up the conduit to Him. And I won't be okay. That's the thing. That's my biggest takeaway from step 4 was that I had to stay connected. I had to keep that conduit clear to Him. I couldn't let resentment, guilt, and shame, it talks about the number 1 killer of all alcoholics. And it's true, without a question. A lot of us came in here really broken, with a lot of years sober, because of this, because of resentment, because of fear, because of guilt, because of shame, because we didn't do the work. And we did step 4, and we learned that, okay, it's a deeper problem than drinking. And I wish it wasn't, but the problem is it is. A lot of us stopped drinking, including myself, and I thought I was going to get better. And that initial list, that hit list, I call it, right, was where it started. And, I still think that I missed some people, but, I do understand today that I have to, when I get these resentments, when I get that anger, I have to clean that up at night. I definitely try not to go to bed. And I sometimes like anger. It's weirdly feeling like, it feels good to be like, and then it doesn't feel good. For whatever reason. But I think it's because of my relationship with God today, where I don't want to feel like that 24 hours a day. So I think that's kind of all I have. All right, that's it. Thanks.